Presidential Medal of Freedom together. Every place, you know, she's always one step ahead, though, I'll tell you. That's great. But, you know, I was told I had 8 minutes to speak today. And the dean told me that I could actually take a little longer. You know, I've spoken in lots of different places, lots of different venues, including some Baptist churches where, you know, they start about 9:30 Sunday morning and they end on Tuesday. But we're going to do a little better than that today because I know you want to get your diplomas and get out of here. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about failure. You know, most of the times when you come to a commencement, you expect people to talk about success and how wonderful it is. But, you know, there's some things that can be learned from failure also. You know, I certainly knew a good deal of that as a youngster. And, but even as a youngster, the one thing that really attracted me was medicine. If there was ever a story on the radio or television about medicine, I was right there like a magnet. I even like going to the doctor's office. So, you know, that tells you I was a strange kid. And going to the hospital was like the best thing in the world because we were on medical assistance, so it would be hours before one of the interns or residents could see us. Most people grumble. Not me. I sat out in the hallway listening to the PA system. Dr. Jones to the emergency room. Dr. Johnson to the clinic. They sounded so important. And I'd be thinking one day they'll be saying, Dr. Carson, Dr. Carson. But of course now they would have beepers, so I still don't get to hear it. But it is important to have that dream because sometimes that's the thing that really drives you, you know, when the going gets tough. The dreams aren't always a good thing. And some of you probably remember the case a number of years ago of the Bajani twins. The 29-year-old Iranian women joined at the head, lifelong dream of being separated. Scoured the world looking for a team willing to take on that risk. I remember when I was first approached about their case, and I told them about Chang and Ian Bunker, the original Siamese twins who lived to be 63 years old, but they didn't want to hear about that. And they finally found a team in Singapore that was willing to take on the risk. It was a team I had worked with before, and somehow they managed to convince me to join them. And I must say, it was against my better judgment, but when I went there and I met those young women, I was duly impressed. I mean, incredibly vivacious, full of personality, smart. They had learned to speak English in only 7 months, if you can imagine that. They both had college degrees. They both had law degrees, only one wanted one, but they both had law degrees. So, you know, they had a very thorough understanding of the risk that they were about to embark upon. And they said something to me that really struck me. They said, Doctor, we would rather die than spend another day stuck together. And that seemed like a harsh statement, but when I stopped and thought about it, and I did something that I highly recommend as you embark on your medical careers, I put myself in their place. I said, what if you were stuck with somebody 24/7? Couldn't get away 1 second. It could be the person in the world you like the most. How long would you like them? If you stop and think about that, and I began to understand where they were coming from. Well, you know, that operation proceeded. We were about 90% finished. Some people were starting to celebrate. I wasn't among them. Because when we got to the very end of the operation, they began to bleed profusely. It was impossible to stop the bleeding, and they died. So obviously, not everything we do is successful. Obviously, there are failures. And in the history of surgery, lots of failures. You know, the first kidney transplants, disastrous. Same thing with hearts, lungs, livers, and yet we're able to do all of those things quite routinely now. Why? Because we learned from the failures. That's really the key. You think about Walter Dandy, the famous neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins many decades ago. First one to try all kinds of things, incredibly courageous individual. And, you know, he was the first one to operate on the posterior fossa. People said, this area is too small. They'll swell, they'll die. But he operated on someone with a lesion in the posterior fossa, and they died. And another, and they died, and another. The first 13, they all died. Can you imagine how discouraging that was? I can't even imagine what he said to the 14th patient when they asked how the other 13 did. Probably said nobody's complaining, but you know. But the fact of the matter is he continued, he learned, and now we're able to do posterior fossa operations quite routinely and quite safely. So you see what an incredible difference it makes, you know, when people learn. But, you know, as a first-year medical student, I had to learn some things. I did terribly on my first set of comprehensive examinations. And I was sent to see my counselor. He looked at my record. He said, "You seem like a very intelligent young man. I bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine." And he tried to convince me to drop out of medical school. He said, "You're not cut out for medicine. You're just going to torture yourself and everybody else. We can get you into another discipline, so you will not have wasted a year. It's only been 6 weeks." And can you imagine hearing that? The only thing I ever wanted to do since I was a little kid is to be a doctor. I finally get to medical school. The person the university assigns to get me through tells me to drop out. I was devastated. And I just prayed and I said, "Lord, you got to help me." And I started thinking, and I said, "What kind of courses do you struggle with generally? What kind of courses do you do very well in?" And I realized I did very well in courses where I did a lot of reading, and I struggled in courses where I listened to a lot of boring lectures. I get nothing from boring lectures. And there I was listening to 6 to 8 hours worth of boring lectures every day. So I made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures and to spend that time reading. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that. Now, I'm not recommending that, okay? But you guys are already done, so it's okay. But you have to learn how you learn. And I must tell you, years later when I went back to my medical school as a commencement speaker, I was looking for that counselor, because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out for counseling. Some people are just so negative all the time. And they can always tell you why things don't work, but they can never tell you why things do work. I think another mistake that sometimes we make in the medical profession is listening to people who give us bad advice. We're told that we should not become emotionally attached to our patients. I'm sure you've heard that, and I'm sure you'll hear it again. Why? Because you'll be hurt, and perhaps you'll burn out a lot faster. You need to maintain a degree of separation. But you know what? I've never quite figured out how to do that. When I take a little kid to the operating room, and I'm looking at his brain, and I'm thinking, that could be my kid. I just don't know how to separate myself from that. And if something bad happens, does it hurt? Absolutely. I remember a number of years ago a case of a young family from New York. They had one child, the center of their universe, the apple of their eye, beautiful little girl, 18 months old, having intractable seizures. Nothing could stop. They pulled out every stop. Finally, we had to engage in a conversation about cerebral hemispherectomy. For those who are not graduating today, that's removing half the brain to stop intractable seizures. And as we got deeper into those conversations, and as I got to know this family better and realized how important this child was to them, I wanted to do everything I could to help them, to give them back a young child without seizures, who could go on to develop in a normal fashion. And finally, the day came for that operation. And I remember them bringing that child to the operating room, great trepidation and fear, but also great hope. And I said, "Don't worry," as they left that operating room. The operation went very well. And when I was done, I just couldn't wait to get out and tell them how wonderful things were, and they were just so happy, hugs and kisses all around. And I didn't need my car to get home that night. I just floated home. I was almost home when my beeper started going off repeatedly. And I called the ICU, and they told me that child had arrested. And I rushed back to the hospital. But after 45 minutes of CPR, nothing. And the code was called. And as I stood there next to that cold, lifeless body, I remembered all those warm conversations with that family. I remember how much that child meant to them. I was thinking that I had ruined all that. I felt like the loneliest person in the world. Then I felt an arm around my shoulder, an arm around my other shoulder. And I looked up, and it was the mother and the father of that child. And they said, "Doctor, we love you. We know you did everything you could for our child. And if you ever have reluctant parents, phone us and we'll talk to them. And you know, that's the kind of reaction you get when you become emotionally involved. That's the kind of reaction you get when you care. And I do not think it is a mistake to care about your patients and to get involved with them. And I think in the long run, it will make a gigantic difference for what happens. But perhaps the most disappointing failure I ever experienced was in 1994. There were a set of joined twins who were joined at the back of the head. In South Africa, they were rapidly deteriorating. And I was implored to come and help separate them before they both died. And we were going to use the same technique we used with the Bender twins from West Germany. They were also joined in the same way. So hypothermic arrest, again, for the medically non-sophisticated, cool the body temperature until the body stops, until the heart stops, pump all the blood out. You can operate like you're operating on a cadaver. Then you warm the blood up, pump it back in, start the hearts back up again. And but in this particular case, they were deteriorating very rapidly. We went through that process, but when we opened the chest of one of the twins, we found a fibrillating bag of muscle, totally ineffective. And we surmised that what was happening is that as the babies were growing, only one of them had adequate cardiac function, so they were going into progressive cardiac failure, and that's why they were deteriorating. So, of course, that twin was immediately dead once the separation occurred, but the other one was okay, and we were at least happy about that. But after a day or two, that one started having intractable seizures, all kinds of metabolic disturbances, and died. Autopsy demonstrated that that one had no kidneys. The one with the non-functioning heart had the kidneys, the other one had the heart. So they were symbiotic. They couldn't live apart, and they couldn't live together. And I must say, on my way home across the ocean, I was feeling horrible. I was thinking, anybody could have failed. I didn't have to come all the way over here just to fail. But the problem was I was thinking about me. I was thinking about my reputation. And it took me a little while to get over that, but then I realized how selfish that was. And that was never a thing that I should be thinking about. And a few years later, when I got another call from South Africa to come back for type 2 vertical craniopagus twins, joined at the top of the head, facing in opposite directions, for a fleeting moment, it crossed my mind that if you go there and fail again, it'll look bad. But I immediately dismissed that, thinking that, why did you become a physician? To protect your reputation, or in order to give people a chance at life? And I remember going over there, and I studied their images on our 3D workbench. We can take the angiogram, the CT scan, the MRI, put them into a 3D holographic image, put on your goggles, study the vasculature. And I discovered that the common drainage system was narrower centrally than it was peripherally. The traditional neurosurgical literature said you should decide which one to give the drainage system to, divide them over several operations, divided in time by several months, so that they could develop collateral circulation. I felt that if we concentrated on the area centrally where things were already narrowing down, that they would immediately develop collaterals, and we could do it all in one operation. When I explained that to the team, they said, "You're the boss, we'll do whatever you want to do." And I remember 2 days before New Year's of '98, big sign over the OR, God bless Joseph and Luca Banda. They were having a song service and prayer service. I was thrilled. I said, "Bring in a stereo so we can play inspirational music." I always play inspirational music during operations. 19 hours into that operation, we were only 3/4 of the way finished. The part that remained was so complex, blood vessels adhesed, entangled, engorged, it looked impossible. We stopped the operation. We went into conference. I suggested we could cover the area over with skin, come back in a few months. They would have developed enough collaterals we could cut through. The doctors from Zambia, where the twins were from, and South Africa said, "It's a great idea, and I know you can do that at Hopkins, but we don't have the ability to keep partially separated twins alive. They'll die." And now I really felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I went back in there. I didn't have all my fancy equipment. I had my loops, my scalpel, a prayer in my lips. I started cutting between those vessels that were so thin you could see the anesthetic bubbles coursing through, just daring you to make a nickel. Make a long story short, when I made the final cut that separated those twins over the stereo system came the hallelujah chorus. Everybody had goosebumps. And when we finished that operation after 28 hours, one of the twins popped his eyes open, reached up for the endotracheal tube. By the time we got to the ICU, the other one did the same thing. Within 2 days, they were extubated. Within 3 days, they were eating. Within 2 weeks, they were crawling. And in a week, they're going to graduate from the 7th grade. But that wasn't the success. That wasn't had to be there to witness was the reaction of the people. This was done in their country, in their hospital. Their level of self-esteem was through the roof. They were literally dancing in the streets. And really, that's what real success is all about. Using the talent that God has given you to elevate other people. And that's what I mean when I say think big. Each one of those letters means something special. The T for talent, which God gave everybody, not just the ability to sing and dance and throw a ball, but intellectual talent. We must emphasize that. It is absolutely crucial to the survival of our nation. The H is for honesty. You need a clean and honest life. You don't put skeletons in the closet. That way, you don't have to worry about them coming out. And if you always tell the truth, you don't have to try to remember what you said 3 months ago. It makes life much less complex. The I is for insight, which comes from listening to people who have already gone where you're trying to go. Learn from their triumphs, learn from their mistakes. You move much faster. The N is for nice. Be nice to people. Because once they get over their suspicion of why you're being nice, they'll be nice to you. And you can get so much more done when you're being nice and they're being nice. Can we all take the niceness pledge? Just raise your hands right where you are. Everybody. Graduates, families, faculty, everybody. If the person beside you doesn't have their hand up, you may kick them. Okay? After this, you have to be nice. Okay? Now, what did you just pledge to do? To be nice to every single person you encounter for the next week. Okay? That includes spouses. Everybody for a week. Now, what does that mean? That means no talking about people behind your back. Some people will stroke out, I understand that. It means you see somebody struggling, you're going to help them. Men, it means we're bringing chivalry back. Open the doors for the ladies, hold the chairs for them, okay? Ladies, it means you're not cursing them out when they do that. There's only one spot on the elevator you're letting somebody else get on. When you're on the elevator, you're not going to act like you never saw the numbers change before. Speak to people. You know, you might have to practice CPR, but speak to them. Speak to janitors, speak to maids, speak to security, speak to food workers, speak to people you walk by and act like they don't exist. Because they do, and they do have feelings, and what would your life be like if they weren't there? You're going to get in your car, parking lot is jam-packed, there's no spaces, 3 people following in their car because they want your space. When you get in the car, you're not going to open the glove box and pull down the mirror. Just get out of the space. Just let them happen. You don't have to revel in your power. But, you know, but what are you doing during that week? Thinking about others first. What kind of a community? What kind of a nation? What kind of a world could we have if we thought of others first? We do have the capacity to do that. We're not animals. We're human beings, and it's got to start somewhere. Why not let it start with us? The K is for knowledge, which is the thing that makes you into a more valuable person. Do I have a big house? Yes. A lot of cars? Yes, I grew up in Detroit. I like cars. A lot of things that rob and these things are important? Yes, they are. Do I have them? Yes. Are they important? No. In fact, if they all disappear tomorrow, I don't care. Because I get them all right back almost immediately with what's up here. Or at least I could before managed care. And you know, that's what Solomon, the wisest man ever lived, that when he said, gold and silver are nice, but to be treasured far above those things, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, because of those you can get all the gold and silver rubies you want. More importantly, you come to understand those things don't amount to a hill of beans. The most valuable thing is utilizing God-given talents to elevate other people. The B is for books, which is the mechanism for obtaining that knowledge. Some people say, I don't need to read books. I can learn everything from watching DVDs and videos. That's like saying you can develop your muscles by watching somebody else lift weights. You know, got to exercise the mind. The second I is for in-depth learning, learning for the sake of knowledge and understanding, as opposed to superficial learning. And the last letter, G, is for God. And some people have tried to kick him out. He's become politically incorrect in our nation. I think that's a major mistake. Some lawyers came to my wife and I, and they said, you can't put your think big banners up in public schools because the G stands for God. And the First Amendment says there can be no government support for religious expression. Well, I reminded them that the First Amendment also says there can be no government suppression of religious expression. So we had a rather vigorous argument. And I suggested that we resolve it at the level of the Supreme Court, which seems like a bold and reckless statement, but it wasn't, because I knew the next week I was going to the Supreme Court to receive the Jefferson Award. So I figured I would ask while I was there, and I did. And Justice Sandra O'Connor said they were all wet. They had no idea what they were talking about or what separation of church and state meant. Of course, you could put that up in a public school. And people who say stuff like that, what do they know about the founding of our nation? Do they realize that our founding document, our Declaration of Independence, talked about certain inalienable rights given to us by our Creator? And did you know that 5 signers of the Declaration were physicians? Keep that in mind. Get involved. Do they realize that the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag says we are one nation under God? That most courtrooms in the land on the wall, it says in God we trust. Every coin in our pocket, every bill in our wallet says in God we trust. So if it's in our funding documents, it's in our pledge, it's in our courts, and it's on our money, but we're not supposed to talk about it, what in the world is that? Well, of course, in psychiatry, we call that schizophrenia. And doesn't that explain a lot of what's going on in our society today? And we need to go forth and make it perfectly clear that it's okay to live by godly principles, of loving your fellow man, of caring about your neighbor, of developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, having values and principles that govern your life. And if you do that, not only will we have a healthy nation, but we will have one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Congratulations and welcome to the kingdom of God.
Extraordinary, Dr. Carson. Thank you so much for joining us.